Hi, this is Eliyahu Berkowitz from Israel 365 News. I'm recording in the Golan, and I'm speaking with Andy Hoy, who actually has one of the more fascinating projects I've run across in my years of reporting. I really don't want to go into depth in an introduction because this is so complicated, so precise that I don't want to mess it up. So Andy, first of all, it's great to see you. It's been a while. Why don't you just jump in and tell us about Project 314?
Okay, in a nutshell, Project 314 is dedicated to tabernacle research and restoration. And I say research and restoration because I claim to have rediscovered the Exodus tabernacle. And I'm not talking in an archaeological sense, I'm talking in an exegetical sense. So digging through the Hebrew scriptures and looking at what they have to say, relative to traditions. And in a nutshell, I found basically a multiple of the pi constant, which is 3.14, 3.14159, etc., which is expressing the relationship between a circle's circumference and its diameter. And so, with me being an engineer, when I'm kind of strolling through this, I had no interest in tabernacle research in particular, but when I found this, I'm like, wow, this is pi to three significant decimal points, and this is back in the Bible, so this is the oldest record of pi in the world, and here it's been sitting here all this time, hiding beneath the surface. And so after I found that, I just kept pulling on the threads of the sweater, if you will, and it all just starts to unravel. And what you see is not a crude, I call it a shoebox model. It's you take the same parts, rearrange them, and you get this really amazing, majestic dome.
So to put it in simple language that even I can understand, if you look at the images that you see behind Andy, on the left is what most people think the tabernacle looks like, which is the curtain that contains it. And one of the reasons why I tend to really appreciate your interpretation is the actual tent was several layers, and the material didn't actually fit. It was several layers, and they were kind of overlapping, and it doesn't precisely fit. And that is the image of the tabernacle that most people have, and that's the image that's the model they have at Shiloh. That's how it's usually presented. Now, if you look on the right, this is, if you take a scoot over, no, the other way. This is the shape of the tabernacle, the very same tabernacle that Andy has. Andy believes it's in that form. What's really remarkable is Andy was very, very, very precise. That's the same amount of materials in both of those structures. So rather than just have all the overlap and they really don't fit the size or the shape of the skins that are on the tent, you have a tent that is actually a tent where the hides are pulled across the top. But so first of all, before we jump right into that, tell me a little bit about yourself and your background so we can see if you're really qualified to make this assessment.
I get this kind of from two fronts. It's like, one, I'm not an expert trained theologian, and two, I guess I am an engineer. Of course, most theologians, rabbis, pastors, etc., professors, they may be thick into the history, into the ancient languages, etc., but they have, maybe not quite enough mechanical sense to install a garage door opener. And on the flip side, there's presenting this from an engineering standpoint. It's like, well, you have no religious authority or credential, so it leaves me in a weird spot where you're trying to show this to the theologian types, and they're just like, well, it's as and what I find is there's a lot of kick the can that goes on. If I show this to people, they're like, I don't know, I haven't studied it much, so go ask my pastor, go ask my rabbi, whatever. It's and then you do that, then there's a sheepish engagement and withdrawal, and it's awkward in a lot of ways.
Well, I'll be really honest. I've read through all the Bible. We read through it in a yearly cycle. So at least once a year, I read through the descriptions of all the. It's a huge list of all the materials, and it's very precise. And there's a little switch in my brain that as soon as there are numbers and as soon as there are lists, that little switch turns off. The numbers, I don't even remember my own phone number. And when I first met with you, you're not only an engineer by trade, you're an engineer by nature. Numbers are one of your languages. So your switch doesn't turn off when you see the numbers and the lists.
I couldn't, and that's how I went to look at this. You mentioned this multi-layered tent that is traditionally assumed, and I was trying to do some other, just etymology research on another Hebrew word, and I happened upon this description, and I'm like, well, what's going on here? And I started to kind of draw it out, and I put the numbers into a spreadsheet, and I see, the numbers of one of the curtains they're 30 long by 4 wide. So with that 30, I kind of just stacked it up 30, 30, 30, because there's 11 of these things, right? And so then the text tells you about how you're supposed to fold one in half, one of the sheets in half. And so you have to ask the question, well, which way does it fold in half? And again, which way do these connect? But just by the nature of seeing the numbers in the spreadsheet, I saw that I had 330, or if you folded one in half, that's 315. Then it occurred to me, it's like, wow, 315, that's really close to a perfect multiple of pi. And lo and behold, I took a look in the text in Shemot, in Exodus 26, 13, and it says, take a little from here, a little from there, a cubit. And then I realized it's like, well, this is subtracting one from that total of 315. And like, oh my word, I just found pi in the Bible. And I just had to do a double take, because, I'm not Hebrew first language. I'm not a Sabra. But I spent some time in Israel learning Hebrew. So, I've known enough times where I've been betrayed by the English translations, accidental or on purpose. You could make those arguments. I'm not here to judge the intent of people who translated, but, in this understanding goes all the way back to Josephus. So nobody's really, up in arms questioning this. Although if you look at the serious, rabbis, the commentators over the course of time, you'll see that they come to a lot of these questions about the courtyard. Well, if this is like this, then how can this be? And so there's a lot of discrepancy. You can go to Google image search, you see a lot of these rectangular arrangements, and you think, well, they're kind of, they're all in the same ballpark. They're kind of in agreement. But then you start looking at the nitty gritty. It's like, no, they don't match.
Well, I think part of the reason for the discrepancy is that for the temples, there's artifacts. We know where they were. They were, much of the temples was built out of stone, so there's remnants. But the tabernacle, it stood in Shiloh for 400 and how many years?
Well, I think it is, my understanding is Jewish tradition is 369 in Shiloh, but 480 is, according, if you look at the account in, I think it's Chronicles, 2 Chronicles 3, or whether it's a 1 Kings 6, I forget, but I think it's Chronicles, but it's 480 years since they came out of Egypt, between that time and when they commissioned the temple, at which point Solomon is reported as decommissioning the tabernacle.
Ah, right. And Dr. Scott Stripling is doing the dig in Shiloh. And part of his problem is, for the tabernacle, there are very few artifacts that would have stood the test of time. There's no stone walls. He's found some things. He's found a stone altar. He found the altar with the horns. He found ceramic pomegranates, but it's not an actual stone structure. So the tabernacle really does it's a big mystery. We don't have artifacts on that level, but we have precise descriptions, though at no point does it say a shape that I'm aware of. Does the Bible ever say it's square, it's rectangle? Does it ever say that?
Well, there's a lot of impressions, and I bring it down this way. This is the simplest way I can describe it. If I told you a basketball measured 8 by 8 by 8, would that basketball then be rectangular, or it would be a cube rather? Just because the basketball measures 8 by 8 by 8, length with height. So the question becomes one of reference.
And now that I'm looking at the images, there's two biases that I see in a rectangular structure. One is that the temple was rectangular. So there might be a bias to say, oh, the temple was but the temple was, as I said, a stone structure. Another is we live in a culture of stone structures, a culture of tents. Tents are not always square. Actually, they're very rarely square. Like you have yurts that are circular. Circular is a much more organic, natural, and effective shape for a tent. So that's why I look at yours and I'm like, maybe.
It's efficient. It's lightweight. Every nomadic culture, basically, from the Eskimos, all the way to you go all the way around the world to Samoan Islands and everything, and they're making all these large dome structures. You've got Native American earth lodges, you have teepees, you have a lot of different huts. You got stone huts in Scotland. You got records of yurts going back to Bronze Age, painted on caves. So it's a very rational way to build, and for those of us who aren't stuck with straight edges all the time, but going back into this point of reference on measurement between the OD and the ID, there's some people who like to laugh and say, well, they point at, I say the King James in particular talks about how the baths, Solomon's baths, between the hand breadth, or it talks about the size of those things. It's kind of 3 to 1, and it gives you the thickness of the bowl. The hand breadth of unit thickness. And if you use the ID, the inner diameter, instead of the outer diameter, and you run the numbers and say, what's this number like? You get pi instead of this a 3 to 1 ratio. So the plain text is there. And so, the rabbis have discovered things like that. There's actually 2 references to pi with Solomon's, the baths or the lavers or whatever you want to call them, the big basins, the big water holding basins. So there's also a misspelling of the word kav, for line in that case, which the gematria implies a ratio of 314 also. So, but this is a literal, you follow this procedure according to Exodus verbatim, and you get, you come out with exactly 314, and it's pretty obvious that they knew it to that decimal point. So,
okay, so when you say you came to 314, was it Amot?
Yes.
And was that the outer circumference of the tent or of the curtains around it?
The curtains around, but you getting into the Ohel, so this term Ohel Moed, you asked the question, or the Mishkan, the Mishkan is the dwelling place, and that's the Hebrew term. Tabernacle, is from taberna, where we get our English word tavern from. It's the term itself is degrading, if you ask me, with respect to what's being described. So understanding that a tent, and I remember seeing a thing from Rabbi Sachs in UK a few years ago, where he was talking about an Ohel tent. He's like, it's not obligated to have a roof, and he was kind of talking about that and distinguishing that between that and a sukkah. So when we think of tent, we wouldn't think of fence, So that took me a little while when I was trying to decode the text of what's going on here, because it's talking about this tent. But again, you've got Mishkan. So the Mishkan is really established by tent linen curtains, and there's another tent that's around it, that is over it, and that's the one that measures the 314.
Just as a tangent, when you not only are we concerned with the tabernacle, but the entire encampment. Usually when you see pictures of encampments, it's actually, they usually try to make it in a T shape because the encampment was very organized. And it was in a T shape because the Ohel Moed, the tabernacle, was, in their eyes, rectangular. Whereas if you have a circular tabernacle, the entire encampment is actually organically circular. And you don't have these big wide empty spaces in the middle, and you don't have, it's just much more organized and natural, I think. So that's another reason why I tend to support your theory.
Maybe those big open spaces are like basically mana field collection points. I don't know. You know, there's a lot of there's Christian tradition that says, well, these camps were laid out in the sign of the cross and everything like that. I mean, I think that's a little bit of wishful thinking and force fitting, because if you start looking at the way that no camp would organize like that from a military standpoint. I mean, there's people put turrets on the bottoms of on tanks, or on the bottom of airplanes with the machine guns, because it's defensible, in all equal in all directions. This is the benefit of the turret. And this is when you have everyone arranged in this T shape or cross shape. Now you have all these vulnerabilities. Not only that, but who's going to go and spill out the waste bucket or get the animals or whatever. Now you got a huge inequity of who's how close to the Mishkan.
And we know that people were sent out of the encampment, so it doesn't make sense that it was T shaped.
Yeah,
it makes much more sense it was a circular encampment.
The most estimate, okay, they say the account of the numbers in scripture are like 600 and some thousand for the number of men, and so they say, well, women and children, we're guessing 2 million or whatever is the numbers. Has anyone looked at like what it would take to support population density? How many miles this town would sprawl out? I mean, I live in a town of 12,000 people or so, and when everyone gets together to see the fireworks, you got this big mass of people. Does anyone actually do the numbers, do the math? I mean, the numbers are there in the text for a reason, and like, until we say, well, are these people all like crammed together, like at the Kotel, like at the at the Wailing Wall for a festival where there's everybody pushing it and sardining? It's like, we're not talking about this kind of population density. People need space to live a little bit, and they need to space out. They would spread out, and they would do it in a organic way.
Okay, so can you show me the verses?
I can. I guess let me throw on a screen share here, and I'll go to 2.
I know my listeners there. They want to see the verses. They want to see the proof.
Yeah. Well, so we have a whole collection of verses. This is a tool I always highly recommend to people. Interlinear Scripture Analyzer. It's really great for, let's say you have no Hebrew background whatsoever. You can see basically the in each word, and it kind of the translation is as direct as it can be, word for word. So I have this up, and then alongside they call this the AV, which is of course the authorized version, which is of course authorized by King James. And if you look at the JPS, almost all the JPS is almost a carbon copy of that. We're looking at 1917, as I recall, for that. But so this first section of curtains is being discussed here. 10 curtains, linen curtains. So we have Vayakel Mishkan. So here it's talking about for the Mishkan making the Uriot, the sheets.
Am I going to have to pull out my calculator?
10 of these. No, not yet, not yet. So this is the one set. Now the second set it starts in 26 verse 7. And so now we're talking about arguably wool sheets, azim, as I recall.
I'm sorry, I'm not seeing it up on my screen. Am I just not seeing?
Oh, really? Oh, I'm sorry. There we go.
There you go.
I'm sorry.
There you go.
Let me just back up. So 26:1 is et Mishkan. So make the tabernacle. So this is talking about the tabernacle with the 10 sheets, and And so this is one particular set that's beginning, and this again is establishing what is the Mishkan, which is the dwelling place. As we go down to 26:7, now we're looking at the second set of sheets, and the second set of sheets is made 11 curtains, and we're making them azim, the goat hair, or the wool, arguably. So we have two different materials here, and then we get into two different sizes. And now is calculator time. That the length of one will be 30 cubits, the breadth 4 cubits. And so normally they're connecting these things like this, and getting into the ends that they should be connecting on. It's kaitsona. We have the term. Kites, I think is where we get our English word cuts from. Kites, katsats, is the Hebrew root of that. Here we go. Kaitsone, or kaitsona. So this is where we're supposed to do the coupling, right? So if each of these sheets is made with, if it's made with loops on opposite edges, and all of them are made the same way, wouldn't that demand that we join them in a polygon or a circle? It becomes kind of non-negotiable. Or if you want to take this, there we go. This other approach of where you're going to turn those things into roof pieces, where do you fasten them? How are you securing this to the structure? So these types of details, people kind of don't really give it the time of day. I've kind of gone through, and when I was in Israel,
now that you mention it, a circular structure would be much more stable in the wind. I think that's why people do that. The wind blows over it, but this square structure, not very desert friendly.
Yes. Yeah. So I've been through, when I was in Israel, I was schlepping these around. We got the Rashi, the Art Scroll, and I've got a Ramban as well. I picked up a few others, in transit when I was in Israel, going through bookstores and everything. But long story short, the curtains aren't given much attention, and I always tell people that there's more text describing the curtains than there is the Ark of the Covenant. And should we then think these curtains are unimportant? The holiest thing in all of Judaism, or all the Old Testament, the Holy of Holies. And here we're just, we dwarf the curtains and we say, well, that's just the women's work. They're just stitching all this up. It doesn't matter. But go back to 26:1. We've got Ma'aseh Hashav, right? So we got this idea of a thoughtful work. The Choshev is thinking, right? And so we have this idea of it's a thinking work, and it takes a lot of thought to figure out how these curtains are all supposed to be, actually, and so it's telling you right at the beginning, hey, you gotta think about these things. So when we get into this 26:7, which is where we're starting to describe what is traditionally assumed to be the second layer, which is and it is the second layer, in that it's being spanned around the tabernacle. So this is a oops, there we go. I'm kind of trying to mirror image myself here, but so the outskirts of this curtain, that's what we're talking about here. So we're making everything, we're staging it, we're getting our floor plan for our tent laid out first. The same way when you go camping, you would lay out a tent on the ground, roll it out, make sure you're not on rocks and stumps and in crevices or in puddles or whatever. So that's what you're doing at the very first 13 verses of this text, as far as you getting into these things that are layout. Now, it doesn't talk a single thing in the first 13 verses about any other mechanical fastening, with the exception of these tachas, these it was kerashim, or no, krasim rather. So these tachas that are in the text, and the lulaot, the loops. Yeah. So when we have these loops, so you go on fabric to fabric loop, and then after that you're using little metal pieces like buttons, arguably, to join the last set of curtains together. And so other than that, it's not talking about anything mechanical. And furthermore, they get confused about putting this over the tent. So we've got the let's see, We have all today Mishkan. So we got the we have it over the sides of the Mishkan, and so this verse 13 is talking about this outer courtyard, which is going to go over the sides of the Mishkan. And so when we talk about over, there's over in this sense, something above me, and then there's over. My shirt's over my body. Is it hovering over my body? No, it's around my body. So we have this, and you'll see actually the word saviv in the end of the Exodus 27 description as well. So, I tell people this is like a big game, as Simon Says, and you have to pay very specific attention. You can only do things when Simon says, or when Hashem says, this whole "Thus saith the Lord." So there's in Exodus 26, what you see is this pattern of Vayasita, the and do and make and make and make. But you don't see that same pattern in Exodus 27. Exodus 27, when it's talking about the courtyard, it's like, and make the courtyard like this and 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 like that and like this and like that. And so the people who've been translating this, they're trying to reconcile their perception to this text, and they struggle, and they try and do their best. They try to honor the text and be creative and say, well, maybe it's like this. And the number of different ways that they arrange the courtyard alone, is it that there's 20 posts? If there's 20 posts on the south and 20 posts on the north, and then 10 posts on the west, well, does that mean that they're sharing a corner post, or does it mean that you have to add an the rabbis, that's driven them crazy over the centuries. You can see them commenting on this and having opinions, and because it gets into the dimensions, and it talks about 5 cubits between the posts. So if we don't have 21 posts, then we don't have 20 sections. And so 100 divided by 20 is 5. And if not, then you're looking at 19 or 21 or some other crazy, dimensional thing that, can you imagine if you're supposed to make something 4 and something 19ths as far as from a fraction standpoint? I mean, it gets awkward. And so, these are these smaller details that come out in the wash on the round model that have everybody, I probably have 6 different ways that they interpret how the courtyard is laid out. And this is of course everyone's big proof. Well, it says in the Bible that the courtyard is 50 by 100, boom. And it's like they walk away, and it's just, I see them, and it's like, okay, well, what are we measuring now? Because if we have a circle that measures 314 cubits around it, and we bisect that circle, because that's what the text is talking about, is 2 tent halves. And this is another part of the beauty of this from a prophetic standpoint, the rejoining of the two houses of Israel, the northern house with the southern house, the Judah with the Ephraim, or the southern versus the northern. There's all sorts of really, really amazing things that you start to see when you just put the curtains together right. But they're forcing the entire rest of the the paradigm or they're trying to fit that paradigm so desperately that they don't stop and begin back at 26:1 again and say, well, what about these curtains again? They jump into the frame right away because they think that's the bread and butter of it all. But yeah.
So I hate to jump ahead, but you're really whetting my appetite, and I got to see this. Do you have a picture of it? What it looks like?
When you say what are you referring to?
Your version of the Mishkan, your version of the Tabernacle.
Well, it's behind me on the
Okay, so I see that fire in the small semicircle. What is that?
Yeah, so we've got the brazen altar, which is in Exodus 27:1. Now traditionally they show this as being square too. And people say, they read their English again, they say, hey, this is 4 square. I can roll down. I think I'm still on screen share here to 27:1. Was it 27:1 or yeah, see, it says the altar shall be 4 square. It's square now. But in Hebrew, what do we have? We have Rabua there. So with this, I'm saying this is, I think either it's referring to that which is quartered or on 4 legs. And so if I have 25 cent pieces, and I forget how the shekel denominations are exactly when it comes to coinage, but When we have 25-cent pieces, that doesn't make them square because they're quarters, right? Because they're quartered, they're still round discs. So something can be, being referred to in this four thing and still not be, having 90-degree angles. So the amazing thing with this, Adam, if you look at, where that fire is, that fire, it's bound in an area that is defined by geometry. And this is a God thing, a Hashem thing. We've got the altar, which is supposed to be 5 by 5 and 3 high. And going back into this idea of, okay, what are we measuring and how and why? So that area that's 5 cubits in there, between each of the walls. Now that other curtain, you see the colored curtain, which is the entrance of the curtain. So that's like, I think Misach instead of Yerayot. That is 20 long. It measures 20 long. And if you bound that against this other curtain that's 15, it makes like a D shape. Well, that D shape, exactly what's fitting in there is that round fire pit, this altar. So this copper altar, which is where they would have done the guts and the fat and everything like that. This is what you don't make a campfire in a round pit in your backyard. Nobody does that. The old Weber kettle grills, they're all round, and that's even heat distribution. And this is why yurts heat so well, because they've got a center stove and stovepipe, and it radiates out equally in all directions, and it's not like imbalanced at any point. So when you're basically getting a square altar, why would you want to burn stuff like that? The corners aren't getting air, they're not getting heat, or they're getting too much air and not enough heat, or whatever. So it's really not the best for burning. So again, why would we assume that's that way? And if we start to follow all these other things, so this is like it's a harmony of numbers, really what it is. And once you see the genius of this, when I say the genius, it's like, obviously I didn't write the text. This is recordings from on high in Moses. I'm just figuring it out. I think after it's been buried for over 2,000 years. So.
So what have you been up to since, I think we worked this out before we started the interview? We actually met 4 years ago, something like that, in Tveria, and you showed me your work. It was astounding how much you put into it.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So and you're not the kind of guy who sits around playing video games. So. So what have you been up to on this project since we last spoke?
Okay, the first thing that I guess when we were in Israel, I had this is actually, I got this double-sided. This is a Hebrew English version. So when we were there, this is all we had to, this is all I had to share really, because I hadn't written anything as far as books. So getting into all this mechanics of the curtains, I got this all laid out. If you want, you can read a big fat, art scroll or other commentary. I've got, again, from the Israeli bookstores, I got a couple of, definite Sabra, Jewish publications on the subject matter. But getting into the need to do publications and everything. I mean, this was nice in that I got all this dialed down into 4 pages. Okay. So you can either read a big fat chapter, a couple chapters on this, and listen to people speculate about the theoretical. I mean, Christians, bring up a lot of Christology that's linked into the rectangular tabernacle. And it's like, well, that in my mind makes no sense. It's kind of a lot of it, again, force fit, a little bit like that cross thing I was telling you about. But when you start going around like this and you understand, the Shaddai factor, and, look at, every mezuzahs, not everyone, but a lot of them have the Shaddai, Shin Dalet Yud, right? Shomer Dalet Israel, he who protects Israel. So this is where the mezuzah is on every single, Jewish residency, right? And so Shaddai, the gematria for that is 300. And then 4, and then 10 is 314. So Shaddai, El Shaddai is the god of pi, in Hebrew. And so all the time they've had reference to this thing, which is I'm kind of incidental. So this is what I had when I was in Israel. So, that was the great thing in Israel. It's like there's a lot of people who are, have the Torah near memorized. And so I was able to explain this to them in about, 5 or 10 minutes with this drawing set that I have. And again, I do have that available in Hebrew. Is translated by Sabra, much better than I could have done. But getting into what else I've done in this whole scheme, I did write a book. This is an English book. This is The House of El Shaddai. Yes, you've got that book.
You sent me this book. If any of this fascinates you, if you are the kind of person who doesn't skip through the numbers and the lists, this book is beyond fascinating. It's all this mass detail that Andy has worked through and made sense out of, from an engineering perspective, from a practical perspective, but totally dialed into the scriptures. This book is a must-have. You pull it out. And like, you can see the graphics. You can see the actual picture of the tabernacle. And one of the more fascinating pictures, which I looked at and I was just like, oh my goodness, was you actually drew, you worked out all the joints and the actual, wow. Yeah, like this also, you had a picture of, I hope I can see it, the loops. You went down into the details. And that's where I personally lose it, is I don't follow the details. But for example, you go into great detail about how to construct the tabernacle. You show. I hope it's kind of weird to do it this way, but you go into the details about how the timbers come together because I think a lot of people might look at the dome and say, oh, that's complicated. That's no way they could do that. But as we noted, that's what ancient cultures did. A yurt, if the first time you look at it, it's pretty complicated. And then you realize, no, this all makes sense and it goes together. And you actually worked out that that's the only way that the precise amount of materials works out. Otherwise, it just doesn't work.
Yeah, the frame that you're talking about. Now, when I say that this is using the exact parts list of Exodus, I was very I'm very emphatic about that. But when I said it uses the same one as the rectangular one does, I was lying a little bit. And let me explain how and why. Is that they actually assume between 2 and 3 times the volume of wood, for example. A lot of them will put wood on assume that wood is being used for the outer courtyard. There's no wood allocated in Exodus 27 or chapter 27 for the courtyard. And now if we get into, here's some more minutia here. Make boards for, thou shalt make boards for the tabernacle of shittim wood standing up. 10 cubits shall be the length of the board. So this is the really curious one. 10 cubits shall be the length of a board, and a cubit and a half shall be the breadth of one board. Now, are we talking about 10 long by a cubit by 1/2, or is it just calling it out in 2 dimensions? Now, what they do when I say the traditional, the shoebox model, they assume that that's a 2-dimensional description. Now, you go to Home Depot or Lowe's or any of these home improvement stores, and you tell them you want a 2-inch board that is 8 foot long. It's like, well, you mean a 2x4? Well, not necessarily. I mean, you don't buy wood with only 2 dimensions. You buy it with 3. So this is the thing here, and the reason that they're doing that, Adam, is they've got all these curtains put together in this swatch for the roof, and they're trying to make the wood frame perimeter large enough to fit under it in a practical way. And so what was a three-dimensional description of the board here is it becomes it goes from a three-dimensional, which is given, to a two-dimensional, which is, again, supporting the bad paradigm at this point the dogma. So here we've got the Chetzi Ha'ama Rochav Hakodesh Ha'achad. Just so this idea, here we've got the 10 cubits length, the karesh, so that's the beam, and they say board here, and this hollow taper is kind of a weird thing, but then we got cubit and half the cubit width. So is it talking about a 2x4 in a sense that's 8 foot long, or is it just talking about a 4-incher that's 8 foot long? Because they're making it 4 inches. So in doing this, a lot of times, and Rashi's got this as far as the socket, the silver socket, that silver socket, that's where the math gets really embarrassing. And they're basically saying what these sockets are they're one kikar, or they're one talent. Okay, so the one talent, they figure about 75 pounds. You could argue 35 to 130, places in that range, whatever. And so they assume that these are the bases that are beneath the beams, and it's like the Adonai Kesef. And so this Adonai, this is again Adonai, that it's just a matter of Nikud in this, but this idea that that these silver, they translate them as sockets, and this word Adonai or Adonai is as Adonai, they've only got it listed, in this handful of times in Exodus. They don't have any other mechanical things to compare it to. Well, what's the root word when we're talking about Adonai? It's Adon. What's Adon? Well, that comes from Dan, right? The idea of Dan. Well, what is Dan? Dan is a judge. He will judge his people, right? And so what does a judge do? A judge has balance scales. And so they're basically taking these pieces that they're insisting they're sockets, because why? They think they go underneath the boards. And so they get the genders wrong on these things. And they've got these big, massive blocks. I mean, imagine like a concrete cinder block being made of metal, but being like 3 times the size of a normal concrete cinder block.
And that word might actually be referring to something that at that time they understood as part of their normal construction methods.
Sure.
And now we might be ascribing to it an entirely different meaning, saying it's like saying a block, and a block could be this, but it might be that someone else from a different culture, a block is like a log or a different shape entirely.
Yes.
So
when we translate nouns, we have to be very careful, and nouns have a way of implanting a picture in someone's mind, and then they latch onto it, and then they can't get away from it. It's got a gravity unto itself. But if you start looking at this from a volume and size standpoint, so we got these big wood beams, which are, according to them, they'd be more like 3 tons, and I'm saying it's only 1 ton. And so this structure.
How do you and everything, they had to carry everything.
Right.
So a 3-ton beam is like, oh my goodness,
Yeah,
1 ton.
To stand it all on end, only, if you ever try standing something that tall and that heavy on end, it ain't easy. You do it on soft ground, it's all that much more hard. It's more difficult then. And so when you're standing these things upright, the propensities are going to fall over. Well, they think that these things are like anchors or bases. It's like, well, if you're going to make anchors or bases, the trick there is to spread the base out so you can reduce the amount of tippiness. Instead of having this narrow
something that big and heavy sitting on one point is not stable.
They're figuring, I want to say it's between 20 and 50 times overuse of silver. So if we're given 75 pounds of silver a piece, 35 kilograms, right? Now this is what the Bible gives you. It doesn't give you more. It doesn't give you permission to go and inflate it and say, well, I'm going to invoke a miracle here and all this. It's
as it was, the women were getting a little upset about all the silver and gold that was that was being used in the tabernacle and not for their
It's inflation. It's some sort.
yeah.
So these big blocks that they put in there, it's just like, have you considered, has anyone done the math and say, okay, if this is the density of it, then the weight of this thing, each of these blocks is now weighing as much as a car, so how do you move a big, heavy silver block that way? I mean, it's just,
And also you're saying there was just not that much silver allocated for the construction.
Right. Exactly. It tells you that you have 100 silver pieces, and they're all one kikara piece, one talent a piece. So with that being the rule, let's take that as a rule. Let's take that seriously, and we'll see what we can do with that silver. How we can arrange it and shape it, understanding that it's performing a balancing function, and from there. And getting into the the frame, the wood redistribution again, it matches. I like to point out to people that the this leather cover that's on it, which is Exodus 26:14. There's no dimensions on that. It's like, well,
Really?
why aren't there any dimensions on this leather piece? I tell you why. Can you imagine a sphere, sphere piece like that? Like what's behind me here, trying to specify that in dimensions. It's basically the text is like, all right, after you get the frame cut to fit, it doesn't say that, but it's like, well, this is the logical deduction, because it says, it's the cover, you've got an upper layer, which then leads you to conclude there must also be a lower layer. And so the lower layer is the reddened layer or the tanned layer, and the upper layer, this is, I think, is the more translucent type. That's kind of like the skylight, if you will, in the like yurts usually have skylights in them.
So, wow, there's so much more to say about this. It's just endless details, and they all fit, and that's the amazing part. What are you up to these days?
Well, I'm kind of trying to get a number of models done, and I have a number of a number of projects I'm juggling kind of concurrently. Let me just show you the. I have a workbook out that I put out a little bit after that book. This workbook is really designed, and being an Erev Shabbat with Jewish people. I've been to between here in the States as well in Israel, and a lot of times they'll do midrash during the meal type thing and say, well, why is it that this and why is it that? So this is basically a book of questions, which is trying to steer people in the right direction who are, again, English first language, that are hooked on these translations that have the bad paradigm, and there's just 2 or 3 places in the text that are translated really terrible, that are like potholes you can't get out of. And so in the questions, I phrase the questions in such a way that trying to help them out of the translation potholes and get the paradigm to help them, so in their mind they can build it themselves. Of course, in Genesis 1, Bereshit, right? Bereshit, what's the first word of the book of the Bible, of Genesis? People think it's Bereshit, but I say no, it's Barash. It's tent head. Okay. So the bet is a head, and bet is a tent, and then Rosh is head, of course, right? So right there in the Bible, the introduction of the Bible is really tent head, if you think about it. It could be, that's one way to parse it, and that's I guess so. That's one thing anyway. But
so I have a question. If people, these are amazing books. You were very, very kind. You sent me 2 of your books that they're not only are they fascinating, but they're beautifully done. You really put a lot of. I can't tell people enough. I have this book, and it's beautiful. It's beautifully illustrated. It's set up in a very clever way. I highly recommend it. You can actually visualize the tabernacle, and that certainly helps anyone learning the Bible, especially if you're like me, where you're challenged with the details. Well, here the details are in front of you. Can they get them on your website? Is that project314.org?
Yes, that
And
is
they can get
correct.
all the books there?
They can get, when I say all of them, right now I've just got the House of El Shaddai series, which is between this, that, and this guy, so these are all targeted at English audience. So I got a PowerPoint, which also, it kind of really doubles as a self-study thing. I've also got, again, these drawings, which from if you're, first language Hebrew, I've got these, this is the only Israeli Hebrew product that I have. And I guess I have to make sure that it's,
I want to point out also, if I'm not mistaken, you went to Shiloh.
I went to Shiloh. I went to Ariel, where they have the Talmudic Mishkan there, and I went to Eilat, down near Eilat, to I forget.
And
the
these
name
are
of that.
people, they have models and they present the rectangular version, and they did not kick you out like a crazy man.
Well, there's my father always used to say that discretion is a better part of valor. So there's a certain amount of discretion I showed in as far as not between ranting and raving. It's and that's just the thing, to destroy someone else's perception of things. It's shattering. I talked to a guy who is,
no question, yeah,
who had worked with the Temple Institute in various capacities, and was talking with him, and he's looking at this. It's like, man, if this is right, the implications of this in my religion are huge. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, I'm not saying let's throw out the call the bathwater dirty, and I'm not saying to throw out the baby with the bathwater. I'm just saying it's like it really challenges the status quo and something.
When I remember once I was learning in the Talmud about the temple, and there was this argument between I believe the argument was you have to be able to see inside the Holy of Holies if the doors are open from where the red heifer is burned. And there was a question about over the arch or under the arch, and the whole argument was how big actually the courtyard was, and the differences in opinion was 1 amah, which is the length of a forearm. And it was a whole section of the Gemara. And yeah, you sweat the details because it's important. You're talking about God's house. So I would suggest, if anyone really, I mean, like I said, it helps me because I can't hold the details in my head, or I don't know, I'm mentally lazy. But if anyone is really, if it's really important to you to consider all of the details of the construction of the tabernacle, and to really envision it as a real structure, a real place where God's presence was dwelling, this is highly recommended. It's beautifully illustrated. Even I could understand it. I give you a lot of credit, Andy. I highly recommend people check out the website. People check out the books and the materials.
Thank you, Baruch Hashem. The whole thing. It's like I'm wondering, like, of all the people in the world, kind of like why me on this thing. I haven't figured that one out yet, but when I do, I'll let you know maybe. But so to be kind of bestowed with this understanding or this discovery, I really call it a discovery again. It's a weird and humbling thing in a lot of ways. So I just wanted with a different. This is another one you're asking as far as what I was doing. So this is the book that this one includes some Hebrew in it. So the other ones are really made without Hebrew to not intimidate people. This one is not yet available. I need some editing help, because I'm really pushing the envelope with this. So if I can come upon some people in your audience here that are that have availability and aptitude to really drill down and everything like that. That would be good.
And people who are open-minded.
Yeah, I'm even in the process of these are refrigerator jigsaw puzzles that I got.
Really?
Yeah, but beyond that though, I've been working on physical models. The biggest one I have right now is 22 feet in diameter, and that one is right now with a congregation in the Midwest, and we're working on getting that so we can display it after Pesach, and
Really?
or around, yeah. And then I've also got 1/50th and 1/100th scale models in development, 1/25th scale, and we're also making plans for a quarter scale as of, when I say it, within the last few months, so that quarter scale would be able to house up to a couple hundred people.
Get out of here!
Depending upon your
occupancy. Oh my gosh!
So that's one thing. I haven't launched. I'm looking to launch a crowdfunding campaign for that. Here hopefully in spring. So I've got a lot in the air, and I got a webinar ongoing right now. That's a 6-part webinar that's Sunday nights, 7:30 Central. And with the webinars, they're I'm basically starting with Terumah. I started with that last Sunday. I'm trying to go ahead of the liturgical, the Parsha schedules. So between the I'm kind of doing the second half of the Terumah Parsha this coming Sunday. Again, it's a day after when everyone's mostly studying the other, but I'm getting into priestly garments. I'm getting into the anatomical.
Really?
Yeah, the anatomical side of this, as well as
because there are a lot of mysteries and unanswered questions about the garments. People don't quite know how they made them. There you go.
Hint. So that it unravels a lot of things. We're talking about let's see, garments, the anatomical connections. The Hebrew is loaded with human anatomy references on this parsha, and I've got a webinar session dedicated to that. I also have got one where I'm kind of reconsidering some of this animal sacrifice thing, and reconsidering it, as far as a dispensational side. There's a lot of people who want to return to kosher and feasts, and that's great. You asked at the very beginning, you said, hey, what about this, does it actually say that it's round, or where does it say is it round? The very, very beginning of let my people go, we're talking Exodus 5:1, as I recall. Let my people go so that, so that what? So that, according to the English, so that they may worship me or have a festival to me in the wilderness. You have the Yahagu, or Yahogu is the term there. So what's the core term? Hag, the root word in there. So that's specifically referring to a circle, and so, or a circle or a circuit, or this circular tour. So right there, he's telling Pharaoh, I want to have my people have this circular procession to me in the wilderness. We have, the Arabs do what they call the Hajj. Where's the Hajj come from? It's word theft in that sense. But so this is like one of the earlier, clear hints that it's like hint.
There's a lot of we still do hakafot, Shmini Atzeret in Sukkot. We do circles with the branches.
You want to. So this is something else I'm discussing in one of my webinars. I usually got this in. If you take a look at, I want to say Rashi's scrolls, they were a certain size, finger widths and stuff like that. If you were to put a whole Torah scroll end to end using his dimensions, you get almost the exact same proportion as the tabernacle courtyard curtain. So within the Christian scriptures, Christian traditions, it talks about in the book of Romans how the Jews are an oracle. This is as it's translated, an oracle from God type thing, you know. So all these halakhic things that you do that makes so little sense to someone who's coming in is non-Jewish, you know, it's like, oh, what do they do? They're just making all that up and everything like that. It's like, well, maybe and maybe not, you know. Let's take another look at these things and to see that these scrolls and so they unroll these things during the eighth day of Sukkot, right? So what do then? They contain the children inside, you know, and so this is the recycling of the year and all that kind of stuff, and it resembles the tabernacle courtyard proportions. It's like, and then you've got what, 2 posts in the scroll? You got 2 gate posts on this.
Also, the nation of Israel is referred to as the pupil of God's eye. If you look at this from up above, if you get a drone's eye view of this, you're looking at a pupil of an eye. So, and Bilam blessed us for the beauty of our tents. So,
yes. How goodly are their tents? Matovu, right? The Matovu.
So first of all, you're working on a lot of projects. You have to keep me updated. Every time you do something new, I want to know. I mean, to complete a model of the tabernacle, that is huge. It's huge. Very few people attempt it. Very few people succeed. I want to know about it when you do it. Okay? The world's got to know. Okay? Is there anything else you want to let the world know?
The website project314.org, you know, I've got I try to post updates on that. I mean, getting into that, you know, I want to do, you know, translation efforts, you know, to get this into, you know, again, to get a Sabra helping make a Hebrew edition of the whole page would be a wonderful thing. You know, I'd like to hit languages in accordance to usage ratios and stuff like that. You know, I've got a number of people who are, you know, stepping forward and volunteering in a number of capacities. And so, you know, translation is one where, you know, we can use some muscle there. Getting into, you know, the videography, video development. This is another thing that, you know, takes time and effort. And I've got a couple of people who are, I'm basically the bottleneck for most all this stuff almost all the time. So, you know, between, when I say, I have to go get my car worked on like later today. And so like just those little things like that when I say kill me, I mean, the Levites were paid people because they were dedicating themselves to that thing. So, you know, I'm asking people to think Levitical and, you know, contribute to this project, because there's a lot going on that, you know, just because I'm not shouting it doesn't mean it's not happening, I guess. And there's a lot going on in the background, and I've got, you know,
when did you start this? When did you start this? I met you 4 years ago. When did you start it?
I made this discovery in I want to say August of 2014, and then I launched the website. Get this, on 3/14/15, which was what? Pi Day. It was Pi Day. But what was the parsha that week? Was Pekudei. Pekudei, where it's talking about the second, that's the second tabernacle account. So, you know, you're talking about the liturgical, you know, study of this. You know, Jews are studying this 2 parshas a year. That's 1/25 of the liturgical year, and I could barely find bookstores in Israel to, you know, that could really, you know, that had tabernacle materials. Period. You know, there's more interest.
People overlook the tabernacle because the main thing is the temple, but the tabernacle was what did we say? 480 years, 470 years.
It stood longer than Solomon's temple did. It stood longer than the next temple did as well. So,
and there's a side to say that it actually was the ideal, the essential place for God to dwell. Because it's funny, because Mishkan means to dwell within, as opposed to a Beit HaMikdash. Kodesh means separate. So God was separated out, but the Mishkan was a much more intimate, close relationship.
I concur. You know, what he said to David, what did he say? He says, well, you know, when did I ever ask my people who shepherd my people Israel, you know, go build me a house of cedar? So that whole thing that was, that vision that David had, it was like 3,000 times more expensive. It was enough money to build basically, I want to say is an NFL stadium in every single state of the union. So this is the kind of money we're talking that was poured into that thing. And this was the I should go like this actually. So this was the the actual "Thus saith the Lord." The instructions for it were much more clear and directed.
That's also true. This was explicitly from God telling us how to build it, as opposed to the Beit HaMikdash, which some nice architect built.
Yep. So yeah, people liking the project, sharing the project, social media, all that kind of stuff, that helps. But donating to the project, there's a donate button. It does work. You can click on it and send funding to help this effort, because this effort is, again, it's there was Betzalel. Originally I was going to call it Project Betzalel, but I realized that a lot of people can't pronounce it so well, so it's like
my son's name. I named
really?
my son Betzalel so that
all right,
we could get a new one.
So
and also, now that you mentioned Betzalel, according to Jewish tradition, Moses didn't understand how to build the tabernacle. So God explained it to Betzalel, and in order to make the tabernacle, God gave to Betzalel the 10 utterances that he used to create the world. It was that important to him.
Did you? So my sixth webinar session, I'm dealing a little bit with the utterances and the Sefer Yetzirah, and a little bit of that stuff that's within. So that's kind of the concluding one. Getting into but yeah, that's cosmogony, the study of the creation, and the way that parallels this. It is, I tell you, Adam, it is freaky to see this, that here they are doing, just complicated exegesis, as a matter of mental thought and everything like that. And it's like, they're staring at this thing and they don't know it, they don't know it from the Exodus Peshat, but they're, unless you want to be, throw out the conspiracy, they knew it all along and they were just hinting this way or whatever. But I believe that they were so close to those texts that they were getting the utterances and the understanding of it without having this vivid a contrast and a picture of it. Once you see this, you start looking at other Tree of Life type stuff and everything. It's like, this is compelling.
People think that spirituality and all this kind of stuff is transcendent. Okay, but it also comes from very much connecting to the material, especially when it comes to the Word of God. So anyway, Andy, I really can't thank you enough. I can't urge people enough. You have to go check out this project314.org. It's just this kind of stuff. It's, even if you disagree with it, you gotta cope with it. You gotta look at it and understand. It's, if you can wrap your head around it, the more you look at it, the more sense it makes. So Andy, thanks so much. I think we're going to end it here. You better let me know about your next projects. If there's a model of the tabernacle out there and I don't know about it, I'll be sorely disappointed.
Okay. Yeah, the physical, I hope to have that available on video, as far as seeing where we can actually see it in real life with people near it and stuff. Hopefully here in spring. So and then the next one up, we want to get that ready by Sukkot, if at all possible. For the tabernacle,
Sukkot would be very, very fitting. That would be.
That would. So we'll see.
Okay. So thanks so much, Andy. We'll be in touch. God willing.
All right. Thanks, Adam.